runs Sugar Gamers, and I'll let them make their own introductions. But this session is called Breaking the Mold, Solving Hard Problems with Immersive Technology and Game.
So hi, everybody. My name is Galit Ariel. I live and work in Toronto. My work is focused on augmented reality, but at the impact of technology at large on societal, political, economic, and even spiritual systems. And I have the complete and utter pleasure to have one of my favorite people in tech and gaming, Keisha Howard, here. And let me just tell you why she's so awesome. Well, first of all, she's one of the brightest minds I know. But beyond that, she's the founder of Sugar Gamers, which is a platform that strives to create visibility and inclusivity to minorities and women and anyone that isn't part of the white boys tech club. And she's also the head of marketing of Live CGI and a believer of the power of technology to create true impact. So is there anything else you want to add, your awesomeness?
No, not really, but I am definitely honored to be here and have this conversation, especially with you specifically, because, talking about technology and humanity is something I'm very passionate about, and I know you understand that.
Totally. So let's, just a quick introduction before we dive into the beef of impact and change and how can we change mindsets and create new models for engagement and new business models. Tell us a little bit about why you created Sugar Gamers and where does it stand now?
I mean, one of the main reasons why is because I needed to figure out ways to access technology, access tools, and access a network so I could be exposed to what's happening. People don't necessarily consider the different things that impact us, like race, gender, social, economic status, and location. And especially with me being fascinated with video games, VR, and AR, I didn't want to miss out. And not only that, it was very important to me to be responsible for the community that I represent and sort of identifying some of the overlapping issues that we all sort of face. So I created Sugar Gamers as a pathway to access information, understand it, and then expose individuals who they're not going to be in the know or be a part of the network that would know what's going on. So that's why I created it, and it's been 11 years, and it's been a crazy journey.
So what is the platform busy with or focusing in now, and how big is the community? And yeah.
Well, from a business standpoint, it's a media tech company, but what it really is sort of an apprenticeship model. So I find the information and I give it to the individuals who are seeking it, so then they can figure out what they are going to do with it next. I point them in the right directions, introduce them to the right people, provide the software or hardware so they can at least be exposed to understand the solutions to the problems. So it's all about consuming media, exposing information, so on and so forth. And right now we're working on how to use technology in a way that's going to improve the circumstances of our particular situation. So we want to be problem solvers, and we want to be part of this huge conversation we are all having today in a big way. And no, a lot of the people in our organization can't call themselves, elite programmers and technologists, but they have interesting ideas and a very strong understanding of, humanity and society.
Well, if we're hitting on what's happening today, let's dive into the first topic, which is reframing old realities and new realities problems. So why do we need to reframe old reality and new reality program? What's wrong with reality?
I mean, considering today's circumstances, we're all in an uncomfortable position, or at least a good majority of us, even if we are financially comfortable, right? We are probably seeing things that are making us spiritually or physically or, so on and so forth, uncomfortable in different ways. And a lot of this has been sort of brought to the forefront by technology. A lot of the issues we're having, especially as it pertains specifically to civil unrest, is that inequalities are baked into a lot of the tech systems from the start. So, we have to reframe, because we're seeing where it leads us, and we're either going to, pay for it now, or we're going to pay for it later. So it's important to be a lot more responsible and human focused as it pertains to tech. So we have to talk about what reframing that means.
Yeah, I think that one of the advantages of the current social crisis is that a lot of problems that, let's say, a few years ago might have been, hidden under the carpet are now not just visible, but there are problems that are becoming, it's becoming very clear to people of privilege that they need to be fixed. People that had, less or no privilege beforehand obviously knew that this needs to be fixed, but now there's no other choice, I think. And I think it's a good thing. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's definitely good, even though it's incredibly uncomfortable. Even as a person who at this particular point in time is getting a lot of sort of attention, I've been spending 11 years saying the same things. So it's a very strange sensation to all of a sudden be listened to after 11 years of saying the same things. So I'm glad it's happening. I am just hoping that the conversation keeps happening, right? So it's what it is right now, but will it be this way in 2 months? Will people care?
Yeah.
I mean, if it doesn't affect you personally.
I think, I think a lot of people in the last few months, especially a lot of people in tech, have been feeling kind of like, first of all, the fear that everything's going to go into a halt. And then they went into another spiral of fear that everything is changing. What are we going to do? And to be honest, I'm quite optimistic. Maybe it's me, because, again, I think it seems like the perfect storm of discomfort, where because of COVID, people are in front of screens. They can't escape, although it's a lot and it's too much, and it's coming on different level, especially in the United States, where you have, on health care and on political paradigms and on race paradigms, it's like all coming together. But I think it's if there was ever a time, now is the time. We are going through historical shifts, and I don't believe we'll want to rewind it to the old reality. And I don't think we can anymore, because even when I look at the younger generation, go Gen Z, anyone snubbing them, you have an issue with me. But I think they are a lot more committed and a lot more aware of what's happening, and they are acting on it.
I mean, I would completely agree with that. And I'm just hoping that those of us who aren't Gen Zs really understand that the new generation coming up really is connected to their humanity, their what they believe in, and a lot more things that are intangible beyond profits. Profits are important. I'm not, having that conversation, but there is more to life than that, obviously, which is why we're having this discourse now.
Yeah, you said something beautiful to me earlier, which is technology is changing the fabric of how society works. And I think it always has, but I think now we have a more active part in activating technology as consumers into changing and shaping social paradigms. What are the core buckets that you consider as the ones that, let's say, need most help at the moment?
I would say number one, education. The way our education system works is broken to me, because we live in the information age. I talk to teenagers and young adults all the time, and we have more access to information than we've ever had before, and it's constantly evolving and improving faster than university curriculums can keep up with. So to think that the next, savant is going to come out of university is kind of interesting. I think that in education now, we have to learn how to learn, and we have to really lean into mentorships and apprenticeships, because even, if you think of it, something simple like carpentry. Like when we think of technology, we think of these super complex systems and, like super high-end data, algorithms, all the words, right? But think of something simple like carpentry. It might seem really simple to hammer a nail in a wood, but it's going to help build the house. It's just that small function and understanding. You can build from there while you're working towards something, while you're working on the problem. And I think that shift, the way that we're consuming information and then applying it, is going to be incredibly important to do now. We can't just wait, until someone graduates from a school. We have to grab the people who have ideas and passion and energy now and help them get to where they want to go, the problems that they want to solve. And I think that, of course, like for us right now, while we're making things and thinking about how to be problem solvers ourselves, I have to always emphasize intentional community engagement. Like we're making a product, and then we do all the smart things like determine what our audience is and the demographics and the data and what they buy, how we're going to make the profits, right? But there's, diversity isn't data. Profits aren't, going to create a situation in which there's a positive evolution for our humanity. Like they're there and they're important, but we need to really lean into the communities that we're trying to impact and learn what that would mean when we're creating technology for people different from ourselves, different locations, different perspectives. And understanding that from a human connection and not from a data connection as a creator of a technology product. Care, just care. Intentional community engagement. Don't be, I guess my whole thing that's kind of always bothered me is that, being in the space for 11 years, me as a woman and me as a person of color is always an afterthought. So it's like, oh, we forgot to include her. And it's like, that shouldn't be an afterthought. I'm going to be a consumer of whatever is being created. So be intentional about engaging with me so I can, you're going to get value out of that. It's tremendous value. And then...
Sorry, I just have to loudly agree with you. Which is I agree with you, which is one of the reasons that I wrote my book and I went into more like an activism perspective of technologies. While I was doing my master's research on implementation strategies of AR, I did a vast amount of interviews with developers, and I walked in and I asked them a series of questions, and they all agree that AR is the next best thing, or VR, but AR. And then I moved into asking them, how do you design for undesirable consequences? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, let's say somebody uses your platform wrong. How do you, react to it? And they're like, that's not our problem. And I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah, I know. Multiple. And then the next thing, I just started questioning them about their testing, because, of course, they all test the product. And I'm like, okay, so how do you test the product? And I'm like, oh, well, we let our devs test it, and then they like it, and then we release it. And I was shocked. That was like a few years ago. But I know that in many places, it's this entrepreneur move quick and break things approach, and consumers don't know what they want until we get it to them, which is sometimes it's true and sometimes you can't just be reactive and you have to be proactive. But I think we've moved so heavily into that mindset that it kind of like obliterated, real hard problems in favor of, what growth model can we show an investor that will give us money?
I mean, and that brings me to my, the next point, I think, or the buckets that we need to focus on is that, I know all of you super brilliant people out there understand Moore's law, and we have to be completely open to shifting our approaches and our processes instead of just like sort of this celebrity worship thing, like who got the money? Let's do what they did, and that's not going to continue our actual innovation. Sure, incremental improvement for profits. Good job. But like really, really, making a product for the next big thing for all of us to be able to engage in a healthy way that's still profitable is going to require an openness to new approaches and processes, not just the process that's popular at the moment that's getting all of the money. And I know that's like a really weird thing because like we put so much time and effort and investment into, being in this space. So like, why think of anything other than your comfort and your livelihood and being competitive in this space? Why think of anything else, So, but if, we're out here trying to solve some of these bigger problems, we have to be open to what it means to be flexible, adaptable, and constantly putting ourselves in slightly uncomfortable situations with people very different from ourselves. So we can keep learning not only as technologists who are changing the fabric of how society works, but we can keep growing as human beings. A lot of this happens because, I talk to people who don't have, people that they care about that look different from them or have different perspectives. These problems don't matter until it affects you personally. So, why care? Well, if you're intentionally doing the community engagement, if you're intentionally educating people as you're becoming educated, because you're not learning this thing in school, you're inventing it as you go, you're learning as you go, you're enhancing your own knowledge. Share that. If you share that with people who don't have that, who might have a different problem that they can solve with the information that you could give. And that's a new approach in process that I haven't seen be a part of tech culture, the techie lifestyle. It's like, or that Silicon Valley sort of approach has sort of, what's the word for it? Tainted how we're moving forward in the future. However, I'm still very optimistic that technology holds, number one, of course, the next keys to how we're going to create wealth. But number two, how we can make this a better place for all of us to live, create more egalitarian, communities and societies. Like there's so many more things we can do with it.
But I want to roll back to what you said about education, because I think you just pointed out something interesting that we actually don't talk about. The human aspect on the education of engineering and computer software, and this is where I think we actually went wrong. If I go back to the old Greeks, the first thing they taught people before they taught them math was ethics, and this is something that, although we're seeing some tech ethics specific courses, that tech ethics and ecosystems outside technology are not being brought into technological curriculum. For some reason, it seems that tech is its own bubble, and it is its own industry. It's beyond its own industry today. And I think what we need is a little bit more humanities, or at least, and not from a legal and business perspective, but to talk about impact of technology, especially when we're building technologies of scale, that now every app you create might be, distributed to billions of people, and you just didn't consider it because of the only exponential thing I believe in is that we're now in this weird age that, we can create this one little bit of content and it can spread exponentially. but with it also the negative, unwanted consequences that we don't necessarily think about. What would you teach in a new curriculum? What are the new aspects you would like to put into a curriculum of technology and within technological companies' cultures?
Well, I mean, when I was going to college a gajillion years ago, I was learning, like there was in business, you learn business ethics, and you have like all the case studies of what works and what doesn't work, I'm so glad that you brought that up. Since I've since I've went into the tech industry, do you know how often I get to have a conversation about ethics? I think you funny. Yeah, I rarely have had a conversation about ethics. Profits, revenue streams, data, big data. How many people can we get this to? Will they buy it? Ethics. That was just one of those extracurricular classes that I took that never came up again, and that is a travesty. But I would definitely put in ethics, and this might sound really strange. So I teach a class called Intro to Futurism to high school kids, or I used to every summer, not this summer for the reasons, but everyone was like, "Oh, are you teaching coding and programming?" I'm like, "No, I'm teaching critical thinking. Coding, programming, engineering, all that good stuff, very valuable skill. I am not diminishing the hard work that goes into brilliant coding and programming. I do believe that we need to understand the humanity around the tools we use. If coding and programming is a hammer, what are you going to use that hammer to build? And why are you building it?" And you should I teach these kids to always ask questions, because even though we have an abundance of information, we have also created a society in which people are polarized, contingent on what group they want to belong to. So if there's information that is outside of your how you identify, then you're not even open to exploring that. And so this idea of critical thinking, it sounds kind of hippy dippy and kind of silly, but we're not teaching that anymore. It's like we have the abundance, but we're not teaching people how to learn to push it, to push it. It's like, all right, well, I learned the thing, so I know this works. So how do I become successful? And we still need to create a system of education, not that we're feeding information, but that we're pushing people to think about how to be inventive, innovative, and ethical. And to me, that's what an intro to futurism or intro to technology should start with. You should have that minimal baseline criteria, understanding technology tools, technology history. We have enough of it now where we can look at we messed this up over here. We didn't know that it was going to be a mistake for 5 years or 10 years, but we now have solid examples of how we can just mess some things up. Yeah. So, moving forward with that approach, and then, giving people the tools to go forth and create all the things that will continue impacting our society, our humanity, our ability to navigate the world. I think it's just super important from an educational standpoint.
But I think also from a business standpoint, especially because of the rip we had right now with the demand of consumers for more responsible and responsive and ethically just technologies and services. So I think this is something, I think we've both been drumming for a while, that being unethical and being just monetary based is actually not a sustainable business model for the future of technology products and services. So I think if now the proof is in the social pudding right now, and I think people that are looking at the products really have to x-ray them and ask themselves these critical questions about what can go wrong and how can we prevent it and how will we react to it. if there's something that made me sick to my stomach today, and I think I told you about it earlier, is that there was a very tragic incident in the last few days where a young guy in the States that was using the app Robinhood, which allows micro investors to go into the stock market, especially in times of economic unrest. It became super popular, and because he received a message that he mistakenly thought that he lost $700,000, but they were just invested on his name, he basically committed suicide. Now, the thing that made me sick to my stomach is the reaction of the company to it, which was so unempathetic and so unwilling to take accountability that perhaps their faulty design or their faulty kind of like explaining to the users what it means and what the risk might be and how to prevent them kind of like led to this. It's probably faulty UI. I've just seen the screenshot, so it's kind of like if I would see that screenshot, I will have a minor stroke if I was that person. But again, this is accountability. And this is where we have to be so careful because technology enables such quick, one-click solutions, but we don't think about the complexities, the piles of complexities beyond the one-click solution. So before we move to the audience, I have one last question to you, unless you want to add to this. So the last question is regarding to bleeding edge technologies and the technologies that are coming now, that we're developing now. And we're unleashing them and numerous, bleeding edge technologies at once, from quantum computing to big data, to AI, to singularity, to AR and VR. Where do you see, in your mind, in bleeding edge technologies? Can you pick a few, one or two, and share your concerns towards the way we develop them and what opportunities we're not, considering when we're doing it?
I mean, well, we're all in a virtual space right now, and it was just recently, that the whole world started paying attention to virtual spaces. And what that means to engage with people in a virtual space. And we've been talking, everyone in VR and AR have been talking about it for a while, and it's still bleeding edge technology because not everyone's aware of why it's important, how it works. And as it pertains to design, we really need to be a lot more, the emphasis on virtual spaces needs to be, we need to be careful. There are some unforeseeable things happening, in our world right now. We don't have any certainty, except for that we will probably be engaging online more than we ever have. And what does this imagery, what are the psychological effects of the things that we're seeing and how we're engaging in this format? Like, yeah, it's cool. It's awesome. I'm here. I love it, but there are parts of our humanity in which we need to be able to connect in a very human way to our fellow human being. No matter how immersed in technology we are, we're still human. We're not robots yet. We can't plug into the matrix quite yet. So what does that mean? And how can we use that to solve some of these more challenging problems that we're having as it pertains to civil unrest, as it pertains to protecting our health, as it pertains to how global information is received, and how we can be a part of the solution and not the problem, how we can not be overwhelmed by what's bad, but be given the tools to be able to contribute in a meaningful way to the solution. Like right now, it's like, oh yeah, donate to this charity if you're here, and that's cute. But then you really have to deep dive into the accountability of that. And I think that bleeding edge technology can really raise accountability and awareness and allow people to have more of a connection to the problem that they're solving, and not just try to remove their guilt. But like with all of this, these virtual spaces, everything that we can do with our phones or the VR and everything, we are impacting people emotionally. We're hitting them in the heart. We're hitting them in the head. Like, yeah, we still thinking about the profits and the business. Again, I'm not that hippy dippy in that. I'm just like, the money isn't important. I understand that, but that's not the world I'm living in right now when, I've been watching snuff films of Black guys dying for the last 10 years. With that being said, like, this has brought a lot of problems to the forefront. And what I've seen as a collective is that we all want to help. So it would be great that if all the people who are contributing to this bleeding edge technology think about that first, instead of it being an afterthought when all the shit hits the fan.
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, that's it right there. We started this conference off with a conversation around accessibility. Actually, day one, we invited several people who are working on inclusivity and accessibility, and the summit that I wanted to run there was to say to them and to developers and to the experience user, like, what would it take to just build in build an SDK basically that you can deploy right into the experience, and so that the front door, the menu, everything else is already addressing some of these problems where you'd have to have a lot of time and a lot of research, not only to understand it, but to implement it. Now that's a little bit different, but not so different than what we're talking here, is where you have to build that in mind first. You can't add an accessibility add-on to a product. It's really, really hard to do. I mean, it has to be implicit in the design. And so I guess my first question for you, and I do want to encourage the audience at any moment to raise their hand, jump in, post a question on the text channel, is how do you build, or how do you make software? How do you expect the industry to actually respond to this? Because you're saying that we need to design with that in mind. What does that even mean? What would I have to do besides, if I have the best intentions and I have it in my heart, what would it change about the product? What would change about, is it a marketing thing? Is it, what is it?
Well, it's interesting, right? Like I have a company, it's sustainable, but it does not I'm not a rich person, but I've had the same team for almost 7+ years. And people are just like, well, how did you manage to keep so many people on your team? How did you manage to keep a relevant brand for that time? And it's because, I was introspective and sort of understood right at the forefront that I wanted to be helpful. And I know that's not really necessarily how business is supposed to work. And I think that just in general, we have to shift and reposition, reframe what is business? What are we doing? Like, it's been so important to gain profits for so long. It's ingrained in our particular generation. That's why I am also too hoping that Gen Z is going to come and save us, right. Because we have been just bombarded with it. So we have to unlearn some of the habits that we've had in order to then move forward with a thought process of like, oh, well, let me not forget. Let me ask for help. I think that we need to lean into being ever more collaborative and very intentional about collaborating with people that aren't necessarily the immediate comfort zone. We need to, and it's harder. It's harder, and it's more expensive, and it's more time consuming. So that sacrifice is something that we have to be willing to make, or otherwise it kind of doesn't matter to me, because it's so easy to just be like, all right, what's instantly gratifying? I gotta eat, I gotta pay bills, I got stuff to do, I have to make this money. Like, if you're in that mindset and that's your priority, then this kind of conversation isn't going to have the kind of impact that it needs. But if you're just like, I'm ready to be a part of the solutions, I'm ready to make the sacrifice so this world can be better, so this earth will still be here, so this technology isn't ruining lives, it takes a couple of steps, in my opinion, it takes taking a couple of steps back and like being uncomfortable and introspective first, and then moving back into it. Like, I don't think anyone has all the answers right now, but we definitely have identified what some of the problems have been and how we can, again, reframe what it is that our goals are when we're creating anything. All too often I've been in conversations, and again, it's just not really a humanities focused conversation. And again, that has been looked down upon. That's been a diminishing sort of idea to settle on for any significant amount of time. So I'm hoping that with everything going on, that and companies are being held responsible and accountable, and it's all very uncomfortable, but also good, that we will innovate and move forward in a healthier manner as it pertains to our tech ecosystem.
I think that what you're saying is also applicable to the entire state of America and the West. I mean, capitalism is eating itself. It's collapsing from the inside. You can't have this elite sitting in ivory towers with nobody to build the things that maintain infrastructure, that maintain community, that can, there was an article that just said, like, there's the reason that this is not going to be reversible, even though I'm an optimist, is that infrastructure is extraordinarily expensive, and somebody has to build, and somebody has to design, and somebody has to go home and feed their kids, and has to breathe and relax and eat and when the whole system collapses, then it doesn't exist. And no amount of money is going to bring that back. And the problem is that the capitalism, creates us in this kind of indentured sort of servitude to the system that just says, like, I don't need you to succeed more than this, because then who's going to show up and do the work for me? We understand this system all too well. I mean, that is what is being tested at its ultimate, hopefully at its ultimate limit right now. But that, this is COVID. Sure, COVID is a random thing that came out of the blue, but it could just as well be climate change. And what's going to happen when it's not in our hands? What's going to happen when it's not just about isolating, but the roof of your building is blowing off and the ocean is raising up 12 feet? How's capitalism going to save you at that moment? We're going to have to pull together. So the thing that I, really believe in all of this is it's not just, and everything that you say is essential. It's not an option. If we cannot deal with that on the microcosmic level, we cannot expand on it and make that prevalent in the culture at large, which will collapse. And then you'll get sort of these fiefdoms and these tribes struggling for survival, and we'll start to eat each other quite literally. So, to me, if anybody needs a different kind of context for this is not an elective. This is not some sort of, do nice for society nonsense. It's do or die. You have to foster the world around you in order to be a part of that world. Isolation is death.
And on a more positive note, and I think what we've done also in the last few years is to highlight very, very specific companies as like the heroes of the industry, right? The Facebooks and the Amazon, just purely because of how they grow, like purely because of their business growth or financial growth, forgetting that they're not paying taxes, they're exploiting their own employees that have to wear diapers for work. That is we don't look at, but we look at their numbers. And there are so many other and better examples that we can look at across the board of every industry. There's Patagonia, there's Ben and Jerry's, there's Wikipedia. Why isn't Wikipedia has done more for knowledge and for society than any other technological platform has, to be honest. It's one of my favorite platforms, because if we talk about information and inclusivity and knowledge acquisition and preservation, it's not perfect, but it's definitely done more for the truth than Facebook, right? But why are we not singing their praises? Because it's boring, because they're not making money, because it's not sexy, because it's just information. So we have to unsexy, the parameters. This is it. We're married to technologies, and we all know that in marriage, sex is important, but it's not the most important thing. We need to think about the kids, and we need to think about, keeping the house intact. And I think we have to even though we are in a sexy, technology bleeding edge is sexy and people don't understand, and my parents don't know what I'm doing. But we have to take the sexy out of it and kind of like go back to the core and into the purpose and everything you're saying, to rethink the purpose and rethink the process and kind of like be uncomfortable about it instead of falling in love with the myth that we're trying to create to ourselves. Because I think everyone here is deeply passionate about technology. Everyone here wants, these platforms to succeed and be sustainable. And back to what Keram said, then if you're serious about it, you have to listen to Keisha and you have to act like the house is on fire, because it will be if it's not.
I mean, I am very calm in a burning house because I've grown very accustomed to just being uncomfortable, being diminished, being oppressed. I know that's really depressing, but it is true. I was born into that. I'm an American descendant of slaves, and there is a history there. My grandmother prepared me to code switch and assimilate with people who aren't going to look at me in an equitable fashion. She so I was born into this, knowing that I would have to find backdoor ways to get to where I want to go. So I have always been willing and ready to sacrifice comfort for the betterment of a whole demographic of people who have to grow up this way. Mm-hmm. So my father was a drug addict, not someone who gave me a computer to learn how to code when I was little so I could, skyrocket into the tech industry and make lots of money. So if I'm solving a problem for myself, I have to think about how I'm going to solve a problem for millions of people. And that's, to me, way more fulfilling than just making millions of dollars and being alone.
Mm.
You guys are amazing. Does anybody in the room want to... There are some comments I will add. Zachary put in the activism channel, he said, under capitalism, most folks are in constant, uncomfortable positions of debt. And Misha wrote, about capitalism, it makes me think on how houses in San Francisco are in such bad shape, but they're still very expensive. There's so much of a big gap about wealthy tech companies to middle-class jobs that there are not enough workers to repair every house. It costs a ton to repair a single room, and you'll be denied if the project isn't big enough, which is a perfect metaphor, I think.
Basically, I mean, this discourse can't stop.
Yeah. You're not going to get to the end of the somebody said to me once about anxiety, they said, the reason you keep having an anxiety disorder is because you keep wanting to fix it. You keep wanting to cure it, to solve it, because you don't get rid of anxiety, you manage anxiety. And that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives. We're going to manage it. And if you know that that's the case, that you can't outrun it, you can't have enough money to outrun the problem. You have to manage this thing. And here's another one. This is a beauty. This always gives me chills. James P. Carse wrote a book called Finite and Infinite Games. And some of you have heard me talk about this book. There's two kinds of games. A finite game has a winner and it has a loser. It effectively removes the loser from further play. The winner is given a trophy and they're lauded. And so all stakes are put into the game to win and defeat the other side. And then there's an infinite game. An infinite game, by definition, has no end. So how do you play it if there's no winners or losers? You play it like a relay race, where you take that baton and you carry it as far as you can carry it, and then you hand it off to the next person. And they pick it up and it just keeps going.
Yeah, that is beautiful, because that's exactly how I have gamified my own life. I understand that it took several generations of individuals to even get to me. I'm one of the first entrepreneurs in my family. So, I don't have I did all this by myself. I know I didn't. And I know I can't continue to do this by myself. So, that infinite game, I mean, at least even though the confetti isn't there, and you're the only winner and blah 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 blah, that infinite game, you look back and you're like, man, you can see all the work, all the growth, all the leveling up, because that's what life is. We're going to be here for a little bit, we should make the impact that we can in hopes that the next generation can keep it moving. Like, you know, I'm just hoping that in my lifetime, I can see all of those efforts that I wanted for the next generation come to some fruition.
And that's the other thing he says about a finite game is that the people that play them, they typically are acting in a way where they want to be recognized for having performed. When you're playing an infinite game, that moment will never arrive, so it completely changes the conditions of play. Now, I mean, you can easily see how that applies in our society, right? I want to make sure that I get the most accolades for having been the most active, the most vocal, the most whatever, so that I can somehow gain traction in the social economy of things. But when you remove that concern and that consideration, and you put your head down and work, and you don't need that, then you can't really ever lose, you know? And that's why it's a purposeful shift philosophically and intrinsically, and how we have to see that there cannot be a victor. So,
or we can just all sort of
we can all be the victors.
Yeah, well, not all, but we can all celebrate our small victories. Like we're gonna have small victories, small, like, and we can collaborate. And like, I'll have a victory. Hey, come celebrate with me. Galit will have a victory.
Let's celebrate progress instead of victory. Let's progress be the victory. And then progress is shared, right?
David Plant said something great here in the channel. He said, Indigenous people refer to the handoff intergenerationally as stewardship. Yeah, and I get that. You know, it's like I'm handing over this obligation, this legacy, this work to you as like the continuum. So thanks for pointing that out.
Well, this has been a provocative yet delightful conversation. I'm happy that there's a platform to have this discourse in a way that people are really going to be paying attention now. So thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for attending. Please feel free to post your questions in the channel, and hope we'll see you next year as well. And continue the amazing work you're doing. We'll be following it. Bye.